Zuwena had always hated the sound of coins clinking together in her mother's old tin box. It was the sound of struggle, the sound of never having enough. As a child, she would watch her mother count each coin, her lips moving silently as she tried to stretch the little they had. Rent, food, school fees, there was never enough for everything. Growing up in the bustling city of Daru, Zuwena had seen both sides of life. The rich, draped in silk and gold, driving their sleek black cars, their perfume leaving trails in the air. And then there were the poor, the ones like her, who walked with heads bowed, wearing the same faded clothes for years. She had sworn to herself that she would not die poor. Now, at 23, Zuwena was stuck in the same cycle of poverty she had grown up in. She worked as a cashier in a small grocery store, standing on her feet for hours, only to earn barely enough to afford a single decent meal a day. Every morning, she took a crowded minibus to work, inhaling sweat and dust as she squeezed between passengers, while outside, she saw women her age stepping out of luxury cars, their manicured fingers tapping on their designer handbags. The jealousy burned in her chest. One evening, as she walked home from work, tired and hungry, she saw a group of young women sitting outside a cafe, laughing. They wore high heels, silk dresses, and expensive wigs. Their nails were long, painted in rich colors. Zuwena paused, staring. She recognized one of them, Amina. They had been classmates in secondary school. Back then, Amina had been just like her, wearing second-hand uniforms and borrowing lunch money. But now, she looked like a woman from a magazine cover. Zuwena swallowed her pride and approached the group. Amina, she called, forcing a smile. Amina turned, her eyes scanning Zuwena's cheap dress and worn-out shoes. But then she smiled, though it did not quite reach her eyes. Zuwena. It's been so long. Zuwena felt her face flush. You look different. You're doing well for yourself. Amina laughed, waving a hand. Life has been good to me. Zuwena hesitated. How? The question was blunt, but Amina only smirked. She looked at the other women before leaning in closer. There's someone you should meet. She changes lives. Zuwena's heart pounded. Who? Amina pulled out a sleek black card from her purse and handed it to her. Madam Agatha. She helps girls like us. Zuwena stared at the card. No phone number, just a name and an address. She glanced up at Amina, suddenly unsure. Amina leaned closer, lowering her voice. If you're tired of struggling, go to her. But remember, everything comes with a price. That night, Zuwena lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The address on the card burned in her mind. She thought of her mother, still waking up at dawn to sell vegetables in the market. She thought of her boss at the grocery store, backing orders at her like she was nothing. She thought of wealth, of never having to worry again. And so, the next evening, she made her decision. The address led her to a gated house in the rich part of the city. The kind of place she had only seen in magazines. She hesitated before knocking on the large wooden door. A woman in a silk robe answered. She was older, in her 50s perhaps, with a presence that commanded attention. Her dark skin glowed under the soft golden lights, and her eyes were sharp, as if they could see straight into Zuwena's soul. You must be Zuwena, the woman said smoothly. Zuwena's throat went dry. Yes. Amina sent me. Madam Agatha smiled, stepping aside. Come in. The house smelled of jasmine and something else, something musky, almost like incense. Rich, dark furniture filled the room, and golden ornaments gleamed under the chandelier light. Zuwena sat stiffly as Madam Agatha studied her, tapping long red nails against a glass table. Why are you here? Zuwena swallowed. I want to be rich. Madam Agatha laughed softly. Of course, you do. But tell me, how badly do you want it? Zuwena hesitated. Enough to do anything. Madame Agatha's smile widened. That's what I like to hear. She leaned forward. Wealth doesn't come from hard work alone. It comes from knowing the right people and being willing to make sacrifices. Zuwena felt a shiver run down her spine. Sacrifices? Madame Agatha stood, walking over to a cabinet. She pulled out a small wooden box and set it on the table. Nothing in this world is free, child. Are you ready to pay the price? Zuwena's heart pounded as the lid of the box creaked open. Inside lay a small red cloth tied with a black string. Take this, Madame Agatha instructed. Sleep with it under your pillow tonight. If you wake up tomorrow still wanting wealth, come back to me. Zuwena hesitated before picking up the cloth. It felt warm in her hand, almost as if it were alive. As she walked home, the city lights blurred around her. She told herself it was just cloth, just superstition. But that night, her dreams were filled with shadows and whispers. And when she woke up, something inside her had changed. She wanted more. She would do anything to get it. And she was ready to return to Madame Agatha. Zuwena woke up with a pounding heart, her body drenched in sweat. The air in her tiny one-room apartment felt heavy, thick with something she could not name. The red cloth Madame Agatha had given her lay beneath her pillow, warm as if it had absorbed the heat of her dreams. She could barely recall what she had dreamt about, but there had been whispers, soft voices calling her name, urging her forward. Images of gold mansions and luxurious cars had flickered in her mind, mingling with strange, shadowy figures watching her from a distance. She sat up, clutching the cloth in her hands. Something had changed within her. The doubt she had felt the night before was gone. She knew what she had to do. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Zuwena found herself standing in front of Madame Agatha's mansion once more. The same woman in a silk robe opened the door as if she had been expecting her. Come in, Madame Agatha said with a knowing smile. Zuwena stepped inside, the scent of burning incense wrapping around her like a thick fog. The house felt different this time, darker and more mysterious. She followed Madame Agatha down a hallway lined with flickering candlelight, her heart pounding with each step. They entered a dimly lit room, the walls covered in deep red fabric. Strange symbols were carved into the wooden floor, and at the center of the room stood a black marble table, covered in various objects, bones, coins, and a golden chalice filled with a dark, thick liquid. A group of women, dressed in flowing black robes, stood in a semicircle, their faces hidden behind gold masks. Zuwena hesitated. What is this place? Madame Agatha placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. This is the beginning of your new life. Zuwena swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain calm. Madame Agatha stepped forward, gesturing to the golden chalice. If you wish to be rich, you must enter a covenant with wealth itself. This drink will bind you to the path of prosperity. But once you drink it, there is no turning back. Zuwena looked down at the chalice. The liquid inside was thick and dark, almost black. She hesitated. A voice echoed in her mind, her mother's voice. Not everything that glitters is gold, my child. But then she remembered the struggles, the humiliation, the years of watching others succeed while she remained stuck in the same miserable cycle. She had come too far to walk away now. Taking a deep breath, she lifted the chalice to her lips and drank. The moment the liquid touched her tongue, a sharp pain tore through her chest. She gasped, dropping the chalice as a burning sensation spread through her veins. The room spun, the candlelight flickering wildly. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her head as voices filled her mind, whispers in a language she did not understand. Images flashed before her eyes, gold coins raining from the sky, silk dresses clinging to her body, men bowing before her. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pain stopped. When she opened her eyes, everything was clear. Madame Agatha smiled. "Welcome, Zuwena. You are now one of us." The change was immediate. The very next day, Zuwena received an unexpected phone call. A company she had never applied to offered her a high-paying job in an upscale boutique. The salary was more than 10 times what she had been earning. She accepted without hesitation. Within a week, she had moved out of her cramped apartment and into a lavish high-rise, the kind of place she had only seen in movies. She filled her wardrobe with designer clothes, her feet with red-bottom heels. Money flowed effortlessly into her bank account. She no longer took the crowded minibus to work. A chauffeur now drove her in a sleek black car. People who once ignored her now flocked to her side, eager to be part of her life. Even Amina, who had once been distant, treated her like an equal. Zuwena basked in the attention, the admiration. She had everything she had ever wanted. And yet, something was wrong. At night, the dreams returned. She would wake up drenched in sweat, her room filled with the eerie sound of whispers. Sometimes, she would see shadows moving at the corners of her vision, disappearing the moment she turned to look. One night, she woke up to find her reflection moving in the mirror, staring at her with eyes that were not her own. She gasped, scrambling out of bed, but the moment she blinked, everything was normal again. "Just my imagination," she told herself. But deep down, she knew it was not. The price of her wealth was beginning to show. One evening, as she sat sipping wine in her luxurious apartment, her phone buzzed. It was Madame Agatha. "Meet me tomorrow night," the woman's smooth voice instructed. "It's time for your first task." Zuwena felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of task?" Madame Agatha chuckled. "You didn't think wealth came without responsibility, did you? There are obligations." Zuwena swallowed hard. "What do I have to do?" "You'll see." The call ended, leaving Zuwena staring at her phone, her heart pounding. For the first time since she had joined Madame Agatha's secret circle, fear crept into her chest. She had everything she had ever dreamed of. But now, she was beginning to realize her wealth was not truly hers. It had a price. And she was about to find out just how high that price would be. The city lights flickered below as Zuwena stepped out of her car, her heart thumping in her chest. The air felt colder than usual, the night unnaturally silent. She had driven to a secluded estate on the outskirts of the city, where Madame Agatha had instructed her to come. The grand iron gates opened on their own as she approached, as if they had been expecting her. Inside, the mansion was even darker than she remembered. The familiar red-draped room was lit only by flickering candles, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The group of masked women stood in a circle, their golden faces gleaming in the dim light. Madame Agatha sat at the center, her fingers drumming lightly on the armrest of an ornate wooden chair. "You came," she said smoothly, a hint of amusement in her tone. "You said I had an obligation," Zuwena replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Madame Agatha gestured to a small wooden box resting on a nearby table. "Inside is your first offering." Zuwena hesitated before stepping forward. With trembling fingers, she lifted the lid. Her breath hitched. Inside was a small, black-feathered bird, its beady eyes staring up at her. It was still alive, but barely. It struggled weakly, as if sensing what was about to happen. Madame Agatha's voice was calm but firm. "Kill it." Zuwena felt her stomach twist. "What? Why?" "The sacrifice seals your pact," Madame Agatha said, her gaze unwavering. "Wealth is not given freely. It must be maintained." Zuwena's hands trembled. She had never taken a life before, not even an animal's. She looked around the room, expecting to see sympathy in the masked faces, but there was none. They were waiting. watching. Her mind raced. This is just a bad. It's nothing compared to everything I've gained. If I refuse, or what happens then? She closed her eyes, swallowed the bile rising in her throat, and picked up the small dagger resting beside the box. With a deep breath, she did what was required. The moment the bird's life left its body, the candles flickered wildly, and a gust of wind rushed through the room. Zuwena felt something shift inside her, a cold presence settling deep in her soul. Madame Agatha smiled approvingly. Well done, my dear. You have taken your first step. Zuwena exhaled shakily, her hands covered in warm crimson. She had done it. She had secured her wealth. But as she stared at the lifeless bird, a dark thought crept into her mind. If this was just the beginning, what would they ask of her next? Days turned into weeks, and Zuwena's life grew more extravagant. Her bank account swelled with unimaginable riches. She moved through the city like royalty, dressed in silk, adorned in gold, and worshipped by those who once ignored her. Luxury became her new normal. Expensive champagne, designer bags, five-star dinners, everything she had ever dreamed of was now hers. But the shadows followed her. At night, the whispers grew louder. Shadows slithered in the corners of her vision. Her reflection in the mirror no longer looked entirely like her, it was as if something else was lurking beneath her skin, watching, waiting. Then, the nightmares began. She dreamed of dark figures standing around her bed, their eyes glowing like burning coals. She saw hands reaching for her, grasping at her throat, pulling her into the darkness. She woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, her heart hammering. And then, the real horrors started. One night, as she walked through a lavish hotel lobby after an exclusive party, she saw Amina. They locked eyes, and for a moment Ramina hesitated before approaching. Zuwena, she said cautiously. You've changed. Zuwena smirked, flipping her braided hair over her shoulder. I've just upgraded. Amina frowned. No. I mean, you don't seem like yourself. There's something off about you. Zuwena's stomach twisted. Don't be jealous, Amina. Some of us are just willing to do what it takes. Amina's face darkened. And what exactly have you done? Zuwena didn't answer. She turned on her heels and walked away. But deep inside, her friend's words lingered. Then, it happened. One evening, Zuwena returned to her penthouse to find a black bird, a lifeless crow, lying at her doorstep. Dread pulled in her stomach. She stepped inside, locking the door quickly. But the moment she turned around, her heart stopped. A shadow stood in the middle of her living room. It was tall, with glowing red eyes and long, clawed fingers. It had no face, just darkness. A deep voice echoed in her mind. The debt is due. Terror gripped her. What do you mean? She stammered. The figure took a step closer. A sacrifice must be made. A life or for your wealth to remain. Zuwena felt cold sweat drip down her back. I already did what Madame Agatha asked. The figure's voice was patient, almost amused. A bird. That was just the beginning. True wealth demands a true offering. Zuwena's breath came in short gasps. She stumbled back, shaking her head violently. No. No, I won't. The room went dark. A single whisper crawled into her ears. Choose, or we will choose for you. The lights flickered back on. The shadow was gone. But Zuwena knew the truth. She had sold her soul. And now, they wanted their price. Tears filled her eyes as she realized the horrifying truth. If she wanted to keep her fortune, she had to do the unthinkable. Someone had to die. Zuwena sat alone in her penthouse, the city lights glowing beneath her like fallen stars. Her hands trembled as she gripped a glass of expensive wine, but the taste was bitter, like the dread pulling in her stomach. The weight of her choices bore down on her chest, suffocating her. The whispers hadn't stopped. They coiled around her like invisible serpents, hissing in her ears. Time is running out. A life must be taken. She had tried to ignore them. She had tried to drown them out with music, drugs, alcohol, anything to silence them. But nothing worked. The voices only grew louder. The shadows became bolder. They no longer waited for nightfall. Now, they followed her even in daylight, lurking just beyond the edges of her vision. Her wealth was useless now. What was the point of money when she couldn't even sleep without fearing what awaited her in the dark? Then, the nightmares became real. One evening, as she sat in a high-end restaurant, pushing her untouched food around her plate, Amina appeared again. "You look awful," Amina said bluntly, sitting across from her. "What's happening to you, Zuwena?" Zuwena's eyes darted around the room. The shadows were everywhere. "You wouldn't understand," she muttered. Amina reached across the table, gripping her hand. "Try me." For a moment, Zuwena considered telling her everything. The pact. The blood. The price she had to pay. But the shadows loomed closer, whispering warnings. "Tell her, and she will be the one." Zuwena yanked her hand back, eyes wide with fear. Amina frowned. "Zuwena, I know you've done something bad. But whatever it is, you can fix it. Let me help you." A sudden idea formed in Zuwena's mind. A way out. Amina. If she sacrificed Amina, everything would go back to normal. Her fortune would be secured. The nightmares would end. It would be easy. Just one little push. One tiny moment of betrayal. That night, she invited Amina to her penthouse. Amina arrived with cautious eyes, sensing something was wrong. "Why do I feel like this is goodbye?" she asked with a nervous chuckle. Zuwena forced a smile. "Don't be silly. Just have a drink with me." She handed Amina a glass of wine, her fingers trembling. The poison inside was tasteless, odorless. Quick and painless. Amina hesitated, looking at Zuwena suspiciously. "Are you okay?" Zuwena's heart pounded. She had to do this. She had no choice. But then, Amina did something unexpected. She took Zuwena's hand and squeezed it. "I don't care what you've done. You're my friend. And I'm not leaving until you tell me how to fix this." The weight of those words shattered Zuwena's resolve. With a sob, she knocked the poisoned glass from Amina's hands. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't do this." The moment she refused the sacrifice, the room went dark. A chilling wind howled through the penthouse. The shadows rose from the walls, towering figures with burning red eyes. "You have failed," a voice hissed, deep and cruel. Zuwena fell to her knees, screaming as unseen hands clawed at her skin. Her body convulsed, agony ripping through her as if her soul were being torn apart. Amina watched in horror as Zuwena's body withered before her eyes. Her once flawless skin turned grey and lifeless. Her hair fell in clumps. Her expensive clothes hung loose on her shrinking frame. Her beauty, her youth, her wealth, it was all being stripped away. The whispers faded. The shadows disappeared. And in the end, all that remained was a broken woman kneeling in the ruins of her own greed. Amina reached for her, but Zuwena recoiled, covering her face. "Don't look at me," she sobbed. "I have nothing left." Amina swallowed hard, tears streaming down her face. "You still have me," she whispered. But Zuwena knew the truth. She had already paid the price. And there was nothing left to save.